Hey guys, I hope your day is going well. Well, today I wanted to talk about the subject of what are my concerns for the future of the world. Well, simply put, we're basically destroying a lot of stuff on this earth, right? So, if we're destroying a lot of stuff on this world, eventually we're going to destroy it, right? Because you can't just pound and expect for everything to just stay the same and for the world to be able to heal itself. We also, being people living on this earth, we have to, if we're using something, sometimes give some maintenance. And my concern is that the way that our society is, just in general, throughout the world, and the way that politics are going, and the way that the stock market and economies and money is going in this world, what's going to happen eventually is, and I'm really crossing my fingers that it doesn't happen, but we could face another war, or even worse, world war. Because if you really think about it in history, why did we have World War One? Why did we have World War Two? It was just that they were in such an economic decline in some countries that they just couldn't handle it, and war emerged. And then throughout that war, prevailing ideas of racism and other things happened too, which is really horrible. But the problem is that we live in a society where there are so many disasters happening throughout this earth, and yet we're not really doing enough for it. The problem is that I think a lot of the countries that have these problems are actually corrupt, and at the same time, I think the fact that there's a lot of people that have a lot of power, that have a lot of stuff invested in stuff like petrol and other kind of industries that unfortunately are in poor countries. They kind of create these wars in order to be able to exploit these people and exploit them in such a way that they would actually take their stuff for a cheaper price or even for free. And it kind of goes back to the times of slavery, where people were colonizing and imposing their values on those countries. And then the problem is that the way that it's done is that, okay, they're kind of making the technology of those countries maybe better, but because they're imposing it by force and they're not treating the people well and they're actually creating wars, what's happening is that eventually 30, 40 years down the line, or even a little bit longer, the colonizations will stop, or the wars will stop, but then they just kind of leave a broken country. Whereas if it had been more of a collaboration from the beginning, then the thing is that they would have actually been able to maybe bring forth the country in a more positive way, and then by making it more positive, they would have actually been able to create a society that's more educated, or not educated, but educated, but also able to kind of sustain themselves better and to keep on growing without having enormous levels of corruption. Because unfortunately there's always going to be that difference between the people who are wealthier and the people who are super duper poor, and will have no middle class in these countries, and the people who are wealthy for some reason are able to collaborate with those countries that are basically stealing all these resources that they're wanting to have, and they're collaborating in such a way that they're getting their pockets rich, and then they're the people that are in power, and if the people are in power, then they're corrupt too, and then they don't want to help the people because they're comfortable in their own way, and they're living on a sort of paradise in that war-barren country. and that's where everything gets very, very complicated. But the problem is that really not a lot of things are made to help the society. That's why some people in some countries are having sort of revolutions and stuff like that, and especially if you're in a country like America, they tend to hide a lot of stuff about wars. Yeah, you're gonna say you can always go on the internet and find out about what's happening in this country and that country, but Mr. and Mrs. everybody and older generations that might not even do a research on the internet are just gonna take whatever is given to them on the news, and they tend to, first of all, sometimes exaggerate things because they need to have a scoop, but secondly, they don't really talk about disasters that are happening. I mean, after all, there's so many countries in this world that are at war right now, and yet we live in other countries that are not at war as if nothing was happening. And some people are trying to help, but I think the majority of people just don't really know about these things, and they don't really realize, and maybe they close their eyes, and maybe they're not interested. Who knows? But the problem is even by creating all these borders in some way, I think that the thing is that the world is getting so small nowadays with internet and traveling and planes, and probably in the near future rockets that can kind of wait for the Earth to rotate and bring us from one part of the world and to the other part of the world in less than 2 hours, whereas a plane would have taken 20 hours. And once you get to those points, what's happening is that the world's getting smaller and smaller, even maybe tunnels with hyperloops and all these cool little gadgets that get you to travel at almost 1,000 miles per hour, and could do a sort of New York to Beijing in 3-4 hours. So when you get to that point, the world is so small that how do you keep the boundaries, and how do you keep people from going from one country to the other in a regular way, But the problem is that the world in the status and the way it is now, it's going to end up in war, because I think a lot of people can't afford housing, people don't have jobs, people are not happy, and I'm sure some countries have people who are happy, but I mean, if you really think about it, like for example with the job situation, each country has a sort of minimum wage in some way, or at least first world countries have a sort of legal minimum wage. But at the same time, have you ever found that it's kind of strange that there's always a percentage of people in whatever country that do not have a job? Well, think about it. If jobs were 99.9% of the population, or 100%, that means that having a job is not actually like something cool. It's like something that everybody has. So the fact is that you always want to keep a percentage of unemployment, because if you don't have that, then what happens is that it's not a privilege, it's a right to have a job. And if it's a right to have a job, then if something doesn't please you in one job, you just leave and go to another job, and there's no problem. You just find the other job, because you know that 100% of the population has work. So then people can't be poorly handled or asked to do a lot of stuff at work, because no matter what you do, you can always find something else. There's no problem. So that's another issue. So yeah, I'm not really sure, but basically I think that we really, really need to be careful as a society, and hopefully we can find some sort of peace, because eventually we're just going to go at war if we don't. Okay, have a great day. Bye.